I've been talking to a lot of people about your program, Flex and Paint, and trying to describe it because it's like this nebulous program. And I've been telling a lot of people it's like an embodiment program. And a lot of the things that's been really resonating with me is this just getting back to thinking in terms of embodiment. And so do you want to like bring the viewer up to speed on like what your experience has been in Flex and Paint as far as like body scanning and like responding to the canvas?
Yeah, totally. So in Flex and Paint, one of the very first lessons that we do is around building embodiment. Really, the two main pillars of what I think Flex and Paint is are embodiment and expression. And I think it's really hard to have meaningful expression without embodiment, without paying attention to how you feel, because so much of creating and making progress and gains in the gym or really in any other domain of your life comes down to just paying attention to how you feel in the moment so that you can make it inherently enjoyable. Like people who succeed in going to the gym, and really the inception of the program was my drive to say, how do we get people to actually like going to the gym? Like that's fundamentally a problem that people have where they say, I'm
Mm-hmm.
I'm viewing this from this thing, it's this abstract, far away land that I'm in great shape and I just put in reps and I don't see why I'm even doing it and it's not fun. So how do you get it to be fun? And I think the answer, what I've picked up on in my own experience and with other clients is that if you can make it enjoyable without constraining it into this like you have to do 3 by 10 or whatever, eventually you can optimize, but you need to first start with embodiment.
Right. With like the body feel of the exercise itself.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if you pay attention to your mind muscle connection, inherently it's going to bring up sensations where you say, this is uncomfortable. And then you learn to work through that discomfort. And you can say, well, I was uncomfortable, but now I've rested for 2 minutes and now I feel good. So if you can pay attention to that state change, I think that is like a fast track to enjoying lifting.
Totally. I think it's very interesting when talking about like just the way that people behave in these kind of things of just, I mean, you mentioned something about like your present moment feel and just how much how much embodiment is related to just perceiving the present moment of just like how
Right.
your body is responding to the space around you. And it's like, goes without saying that that's like right now. It's like right now, how is it? I guess as compared to this very like heady, like ethereal state that a lot of people exist in of planning for the future or thinking about scenarios or like problem solving that is very disembodied. It's also very dissociated from the present moment.
Yeah, totally. Well, and one of the core lessons that I try to instill in the first few weeks of the program is making that delineation of like our brain is really good at planning and at having this like future result. And we say we're trying to put everything into a box of like, am I making progress or am I doing it the right way or am I optimizing? And like we have a strong capacity to actually do that. But if you can't ever connect to like, how do I feel right now? Then what is all of that for? Like I think about it for fitness, it's like 80% of the battle is just getting in the gym and just moving your body around and just connecting with your body. And then later you can use all of the tools of like, I know how to bench press or I know how to squat or like any of these things that are tools that will get you there faster. But if you aren't even willing to like interrogate your senses and be like, how do I even feel when I get my heart rate up? It's a lot harder.
Right. And so I think what's been really cool about Flex and Paint and just watching you go through like the process of putting together this program is how these ideas of body awareness and like checking in with how your body feels are related to the painting as well.
Right. Yeah, because that's my approach to painting. I think about back to when I first started, so much of it was like, I am going to just move and start with emotion and then understand what my body is saying about what if I did something well or poorly, or not really even making like a category judgment on it, but making just an analysis of saying, I painted it yellow. Does that speak to me? Does that feel right? And
Yeah,
so
just like how does your body respond to it?
yeah, exactly. And I think I've been really fortunate to find that with looking at that as the only lens, I've been able to make paintings that are more and more, in my opinion, successful in evoking that expression that I was aiming for in the first place. But so much
Mm-hmm.
of that comes down to like, can I listen? If I lay down just a single brushstroke, how do I feel about it? Do I feel like I want more of that? Do I feel like I want less of that? Is there some other feeling that I haven't pinpointed?
Hmm.
Because you do have to spend a lot of time just interrogating your senses rather than interrogating this objective thing. Because that's the thing that people can teach you. They can show you, like, here's how you draw a stick figure or a figure or a portrait or whatever. But that doesn't do anything to answer, like, do you feel like you made progress? Like, do you feel like this is an act that you're enjoying? Or do you feel like it's the end result actually speaks to you in any capacity?
Hmm. Well, it's very interesting to look at people's art, especially like people that have gone through art school or some amount of like regimented art education, how you get all the lines for, say, a figure in the right place, but it doesn't have the actual piece of art itself is not embodied in any meaningful way. Like it doesn't speak. It doesn't seem very like it doesn't have the movement to it. And I think it is a very interesting exercise in Flex and Paint to just try and get whatever that ethereal like embodiment is first without the technique. It's
Yeah.
totally opposite of how like things are usually taught, but I think very valuable.
Yeah, and I think about all of the natural conclusions that one would draw that are technical that you're only going to pick up on if you have body awareness. And like I talk about in one of the lessons, like understanding line weight is like a really good example of like line weight is a technical tool that people use. You vary your line weight in a drawing, but you can start without like thinking about line weight and just saying how much pressure am I applying? What is my hand and my sensations? How do I feel when I'm really digging in to the canvas or the paper versus like I'm being super gentle with it. And
Mm-hmm.
like when you find a piece of art that has done that successfully, you can tell that that was somebody's their bodily response. They were being either really aggressive with it or they were being really sensual with it. And so to like see that, like it's obvious to people who have kind of picked up on that.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting. I'm interested in exploring this idea of like you talked about expression and embodiment and just like how they are related to each other. And then also in the lens of, I think it ties in really well with anxiety. Because I was talking to some people at the studio today about this just idea of anxiety and how when you're afraid of something, your attention span gets shorter and shorter and you're in this like scanning mode. And it's almost like a
Hmm.
disembodied kind of way of being. And
Yeah,
I would say to have any amount of expression at all is kind of predicated on being embodied, which is also predicated on not having a high level of anxiety.
totally. And they are so like there's such a positive feedback loop between being disembodied and having some amount of anxiety because it's like my like working definition for anxiety it's a good thought of like you're in scanning mode because
Mm-hmm.
we have to assess like what's around us, but from like this lens of like, and that's kind of the root of it. It's like fear of like be aware that there are things in your environment that might harm you. And
Mm-hmm.
so much of it, our thinking brain has extended out to say like, I'm going to have a future scenario that hasn't occurred, but I'm going to worry about it. And if you're in that state all the time, then you're not paying direct attention to your body or to how you feel outside of just the simple fact that you have anxiety or you have bodily sensations around anxiety, which that
Mm-hmm.
leaves no room for any other sense in a lot of cases.
Totally. I mean,
Yeah,
I think about even just when you have like a panic situation, how easy it is to hurt yourself and not even notice
right.
because you're anxious, like you're disembodied in that anxious state. Whereas, if I'm just sitting here in my chair and I like cut my leg, like of course I would notice right away because I'm embodied, I'm relaxed.
Right. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, and I think it's essential. Like I tried to structure the program in such a way that embodiment came first
yeah.
because expression, like you said, is predicated on having embodiment because
Mm-hmm.
you can't like interrogate what it is that you're feeling and what it is that you want to express if you're not even aware of those sensations in the first place of like, oh, I actually am trying to express some amount of anxiety or I'm trying to express a feeling of tranquility or a feeling of stillness or a feeling of motion. And like
Mm-hmm.
to be aware of what that feels like in your body first, I think is essential. And then only then can you get to that level of expression.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very interesting how they're all tied together. And I think it's I mean, it's a good just exposition on why having an expression based practice is really good for anxiety. Is
Yeah.
that it's kind of, I mean, that's what I was telling the guys at the studio today, is this idea that without actually consciously choosing to do it, if you sit down, say at the pottery wheel to make something, you don't even really start until your senses have established that you're safe. Like you can't.
Right.
And so even if you don't give people all the theory and all the like, this is related to that and blah, 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 just to get people doing some sort of expressive practice, I do feel like they naturally tend towards one, relaxation, and two, embodiment.
Yeah. Well, and it was really cool in the results of the first few exercises in the program where we're saying we're going to draw with our eyes closed. It's pretty much everybody had the response of saying, yeah, I felt like it was calm or it was fun or I was excited. Like they had room for other emotions because
Mm-hmm.
they've kind of absolved this fear of, and that's kind of why I think the exercise is effective, is to say, with your eyes closed, we're going to acknowledge that you can't make anything good. It's just not going to be good.
Yeah,
So don't even worry about it.
totally.
And it kind of gets people to focus on their movement before they focus on the end result. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's another huge problem that people have is like fear of a blank canvas or fear of going into the gym and moving. And it's like, well, if you've
Totally.
established that you know how to move and you know how to like do a thing, perform an action, then often that appeases this sense of being like, I'm worried about the future or I'm worried about this end goal, this end state.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. I really like that, like drawing with your eyes closed, and just like how far away it is from just the classical school experience that people have, where it's
Right.
like we're conditioned from the age of say 6 to 18 or 22. You have 15 years of everything you do will be judged and everything has a result. And so if some amount of relaxation for genuine expression, if relaxation is the first step in genuine expression, then in a lot of ways school has put you, you never hit step zero. You can never relax because you always know that
Right.
there's going to be some amount of judgment always.
Yeah.
And I think that is a lot of the reason why people are so afraid of expression and have just generally anxiety, is that it's just become habitual that everything is judged. And so you have to worry about it before you do it.
Totally. And it's judgment is a weird one because I think there is absolutely space and a place for judgment. And that's like a
Mm-hmm.
thing that I am having an interesting time like articulating, a hard time articulating that like judgment is good and judgment needs to be there so that you do actually continue to pivot your compass towards like having the correct result or the result that you want, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And it's weird because we initially allow for external judgment, where I think so much of what we need to reframe is like internal judgment of like, I am going to lay down a line and then lay down another line and say, can I make a judgment here and say, which of these two lines did I like more?
Mm-hmm.
And it builds your own trust in yourself to say, I can believe that I have taste. I can believe that I have this expression and my own faculties for making a judgment. I can trust that. But
Yeah,
you have to get the motion out first before
totally.
you can make
What
judgments.
I think to that point, to make some amount of a judgment on your own work rather than external judgment is a good differentiator to say that the judgment cannot hurt you.
Right.
Because I think, especially with school, you start so young and your whole, how there's so much like your value and like how well you're doing and like all these different things are so tied into the judgments that you're receiving. And that can just go right into like the corporate ladder where it's like your very survival is based on getting a paycheck, which is based on these judgments from external factors. But to say, well, actually, your judgment is a good thing and it can't hurt you is a really valuable thing in making art.
Yeah, definitely. And it's like, it's a thing that if you completely ignored and you only ever said, I'm just going to be move, and never even pay any attention to analytics
Mm-hmm.
or like make any level of judgment, like you're just fundamentally not going to improve. Like you do actually need that as a skill because and that's
Yeah.
how it
Well,
works for everything.
I
Yeah.
think we kind of saw that in a lot of the art movements in say the last like 50 years of just this very like splash it on there, like I'm going to describe it as like art without skill, or just like this totally free for all modern art that a lot of people have developed some amount of disdain for. But it seems like that, saying no judgment at all, just like only expression.
Yeah.
and maybe relevant in the time period, that it was. But I think I'm seeing a lot more now of like a lot of people trying to make a synergy of the two, of like genuine expression and some sort of modern expressiveness without forsaking technique entirely and without forsaking judgments towards quality.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny. I just went to an art fair here in Tempe. I went to the Tempe Festival, and like I saw a couple artists where they had their very like splatter, like resin pour art. And like I think to that point, some of the disdain, like I have some amount of judgment around certain things like that because I feel like I get the sense upon looking at somebody's entire body of work that I'm like, I don't feel like you've made that judgment for yourself. You said I'm doing this movement based thing and I'm just getting it on there, but I'm never going to categorize and say which of these things actually aligned with what I found to be quality. And maybe I just don't have the eye for it where I'm like I don't spend my time doing that, so I don't know if something is good or bad in this domain. But so much of that I personally have that my tastes say that yeah, I can tell that this isn't a thing that you've spent any time interrogating your own response to your own work. You're just doing it for the sake of doing it, which I
Totally.
don't know.
Well, and also, I think there's something to be said about also like not taking any time doing it.
Yeah.
Like there's this, because there was definitely, especially with the pour painting, but I think just generally with this very like hyper expressive painting is that it's very fast.
Hmm.
And I think, I mean, I've always really liked the work of Van Gogh because it's extremely expressive and it's very fast, but it's not so fast such that no time was put into the canvas. Like it still has elements of composition and it still builds up layer by layer. And there's still like something to be said other than look at me, I'm expressing myself, you
Yeah.
know?
And you can tell that there are pieces where you're like, he spent a lot of time deliberating on this brush stroke or this. Like there definitely are elements where you can say, I know that he was something in him was churning,
Mm-hmm.
whether that be an intellectual thing of being like, I need to get the value correct on this or the shape right on this or whatever. But so it doesn't have a complete disregard for that like interrogation, that judgment.
Totally.
Yeah. But I think it's interesting because I always encourage, at least for people making art, like just start. And that's the thing. Like it's so I even kind of hedge my words here. I'm like,
Totally.
it's better to just do the motion thing first, so long as you're aware of like what is this actually making you feel. And if you feel good while you're creating, like more power to you. Like absolutely keep pushing on with that. But I think a lot of the beauty of art is from understanding your own reflections on your pieces. So
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think as a practice, you get like you get the same kind of element of layering as any given endeavor where you are going to do something, but then process it and then make a change and then do it, to keep going, whether you're
yeah,
layering within one canvas or between, subsequent pieces.
right.
And that like dynamic kind of development over a piece, but over a career, I think is really, really valuable. And I
Totally.
do think that some of that can get lost in the like too much, too loose. Like it can, there is, to me, there's a line of like too loose.
Totally. And it's kind of funny because in the most recent exercise, I was articulating this concept of how you need to like find out when to make judgments where I said
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, if you draw one line and draw another, pick one. Which one do you like more? That's a judgment that you're going to make. You still have to start with and lead with the motion and do the
Totally.
movement first. And I said, you can even make that judgment, withhold judgment until you finished and said, which month of work do I like more? Did I
Totally.
paint for a month and then paint again and say, I just have a better response to this one.
Mm-hmm.
And then as you begin to, I think actually zooming way out and saying, just do the motions, do all that stuff first so that you're in the habit of getting repetitions is far better than trying to make subtle judgments within each piece. But eventually, as you build your skill and discernment, then you can say you can apply those within a piece. But I think like taking two finished paintings and making a choice and saying, I like this one more, I want to do more of that is a really important skill that you can then interpolate into your individual pieces. But you have to like kind of know when is the right time to do that.
Totally. I mean, it's very easy to just fall back into getting like blocked on judgments. Like it is.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's like why people get artist block. Like I get that all the time where I'll be like, oh, I have this standard of quality that I've set for myself and this thing that I'm making a judgment before I've even done the motion. And it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's been fun, definitely been fun to try to extend that again into like the gym, where it's like so much of that is like, don't put judgments on whether or not you're doing something correct. And I have to hedge my bets on this, is like as a personal trainer of like, don't do the thing wrong where you're going to hurt yourself. But so many
Yeah,
things, especially body weight, it's like you can get a bunch of reps in without hurting yourself for body weight. And you can learn between
totally.
reps, like which push up felt better. So
Totally. I mean, I know that was a big thing. I mean, like it's like my early kind of like I worked a carpentry job making doors. That was like a really early like embodiment thing because I was it was just after college and it was the first time that I'd just been like very much paying attention to my body all day. But I noticed pretty early on that it was really easy to develop some amount of an injury over time from posturing myself in the wrong way, but it was like a low enough, it was very natural work without that heavy of stuff that it was always a learning thing. And so I
yeah,
think the same thing kind of implies with like body weight kind of stuff in the gym too, is you can kind of like learn where your posture is wrong by where you get hurt.
totally. Yeah, and it's tricky because a lot of times it isn't intuitive when you've started to add a lot of weight, and
Mm-hmm.
you can definitely progress down a path where you're like squatting like crazy, and then you develop a muscle imbalance because you never hit like your posterior chain or whatever. And so it's like, yeah, with when you start adding resistance and start building skills in one, you might become overdeveloped. But like your body itself and doing body weight, I think is great for that because it starts again with that like embodiment and interrogation before you've like added way too many tools that feel like soulless.
Totally. Or just, yeah, too many tools. So the signal is like obscured with just too much
Right.
information, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah, and it's kind of this thing that I try to like help people to get in the gym of like breaking it down to where they're, like you said, where is the signal obscured? So much of people, when they are like trying to get in shape, they have some amount of anxiety, but they don't know where that anxiety is. Where it's
Mm-hmm.
like, I try to at least say, can you break it down into like, is it action unfamiliarity where you're projecting like, I don't know how to do this exercise, so I'm going to do it wrong and like I'm afraid of that? Or is it the location unfamiliarity of like, I'm afraid to go into this space and like look foolish or whatever? And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, if you can like acknowledge that and I like interrogate yourself and say, where do I have this anxiety? It becomes a lot easier to solve for one and then solve for the other and then combine the two. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And it kind of comes back to the embodiment thing of just having some amount of like, I mean, I think to me, just to like why embodiment is so important is you just have this like place to come back to check in, or like a place you've got like your home base in your body to come back and like use it for analysis. And
right.
so just in that example, exactly, you say, well, where exactly am I feeling the anxiety? You're really kind of interrogating your own body to be like, what is evoking this in me? And I
Yeah.
think there's all these like good, really good, powerful trains of thought you can go down once you've established some amount of familiarity with like embodiment as a thing.
Yeah. Well, and I'm hoping that everybody at the end of the program, they get how you can extrapolate into other domains. Like for me, it's like, yeah, flex and paint is those are the two that I have the most familiarity with, where it's like use embodiment and expression in art and fitness. But
Mm-hmm.
I see the same thing where it's like, yeah, if I have anxiety about my job or like so it's like, yeah, can I interrogate myself and like use that to get better in another area of my life? Um,
Totally.
so it's I've been trying to like not bite off more than I can chew and be like, yeah, you can use this as a tool for everything, but like master it in a couple spots first.
Totally. I think what was a big thing in my life is realizing how much of my like mood and just general just the way that I felt about everything was one like manifest in my body but then became manifest in my posture.
Hmm.
And I noticed that even a couple months ago I went to the lumber yard with a friend, and it's like a the lumber yard is like kind of an intimidating place. There's a lot going on, and there's like four employees kind of gruff just like hanging out being like, what do you want, like what are you doing here?
Right.
And he just really like curled up and like made himself so small, and I was like, oh no, you gotta like notice that and then fight it off. But it's incredible how much to just be like to notice your posture, make a conscious choice to change it, then also takes away the anxiety, like removes so much of those different like feelings.
Yeah.
And that is just like a really good, I don't know, it's just so it's like I said, it's like a home base. It's like a way that you can kind of analyze anything that's happening and just like what's my body doing, but then what's my posture.
Yeah. Well, and it is funny because so much of it is this like feedback loop of like how your internal state is reflected in your posture and how you can change your posture to then influence your internal state.
Totally.
And like I think that's the benefit a lot of times of weightlifting, like the flex part of it, where it's like, yeah, flex it yourself in the mirror a little bit, like take up space, claim some stuff. And
Totally.
like inherently you're gonna have more of like an it's going to be okay to claim space on the paper if you're trying to create, or claim space in a room if you want to be more social or whatever.
Hmm.
I think it's interesting in the same vein of how you're going to naturally have a response when you're in like a lumberyard or like an intimidating environment. Like there are so many things that people don't think about as like a facet of their environment where they are going to have a bodily response. Where if you're not aware, if you're not taking it from this place of embodiment, of body awareness, you're just going to let these things kind of accumulate and you'll have this sort of negative response. And like I know that you've been writing a lot lately, and like that's a thing that you've put deliberate attention into, is like curating your environment so that you have space to make effective outputs. Like how is that going for you lately as you've been working on your book and like pruning out parts of your environment, whether that be your phone or other things? Like
Hmm.
how does that feel for you?
It's been good. It's been like a transition, but I think like, I mean, a lot of it has been to me kind of like returning to some of the embodiment stuff as the baseline. Something I was thinking about today was just like when I first started writing, it was very much always an embodiment practice. Like I always write like with a fountain pen, but I'd sit and just pay attention to sitting really like square, sitting upright, you know, and then just pay attention to my posture as I was writing. And that was almost like half my awareness. And I realized just this last like almost 2 weeks of just getting back into writing how much I did all the things that you would coach people out of like focusing way too much on the outcome, trying to be like very high anxiety about being productive, but then also just like using my laptop a lot more and my phone. And I realized even just the last couple of days how much different it is to be working in that way, in that it's just totally disembodied. And you've kind of like lost this like baseline level of relaxation that's necessary to create.
Right.
So my focus like the last couple of days has been to approach like the whole process of writing as I would approach any other environment. Like, I mean, I just was at the shop and we've been really talking about your body's response to like the space and removing like a lot of like piles, like disorganization, like broken tools, just like all this stuff that just doesn't have a good body feel. And then I'm kind of bringing that back to my writing to be like, that's kind of fundamental. And I really have tried to jump in to be like, get a lot of stuff done. But it's like, no, that's fundamental to curate it in such a way that it feels good and to remove this like random noise.
Right.
And then I think that goes right into like kind of the phone use and stuff, as I found for me, like so much of it is just random noise. And I like to think of it in the same way as if you have like an apartment or a living space or like you're a physical environment where there's just too much stuff. You just have like piles of nonsense everywhere. I think there's some element of having like this mental space that it's really easy to just throw in a bunch of garbage through like your phone, just random stuff.
Yeah.
And I think you have a similar effect of like one, it's kind of high anxiety. There's just like stuff everywhere mentally. Um, but there's not clear pathways for your mind to go down. There's not clear trains of thought just from
Yeah.
the sheer amount of information. So that's kind of what I've been working on lately.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I like to think of it in terms of like polluting the space of like it's very easy and apparent to make the artistic parallel where it's like if you are trying to paint something meaningful or draw something and your canvas already has a bunch of marks on it that you didn't make, it's really
Mm-hmm.
hard to like go and actually create something. Where
Totally.
we don't really think about that in the abstract of like if you start getting on your phone right away in the morning and you're like you've already polluted your blank canvas, so to speak. Where it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, you have all of these thoughts that are going to influence your creative process. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it's difficult when it becomes so much more vague. So we have to like again interrogate like how we feel after you've scrolled on TikTok or Instagram or Reddit or whatever for 10 minutes and you're like, well, yeah, how does my body feel that I've added these junk piles in my space?
Totally. I mean, it feels bad.
Yeah, yeah, it feels bad.
It definitely is. I mean, I do think it's a peculiar feeling, just this like I found with my phone, especially, just this peculiar feeling of like it's hard to like sink into the present moment. And I know
Yeah.
I've had like just a lot of just time at my desk where it's just like just sitting very still and just like looking at just what's around the paper, the wall. But there's all these like subtle details. Like even now I'm looking at the wall and seeing just the reflection of the lamp off of the paint.
Hmm.
Just this like subtle kind of thing where you look around and see the world as like saturated with color and like just information. But if I'm on my, if I'm on the screen for like an hour, it's like everything's been covered with just a sheen of like gray, where it's like just the little fine the little saturation and the texture and stuff just kind of like misses your awareness entirely. And I think
Totally.
that's one of the most interesting things about screens, really, and just like the modern kind of life that people live of just like unless you make a really conscious effort to cut those things out of your life and like compare the two states, you don't even know what you're missing, really. And that's like a same as like an embodiment thing. It's like if you're not used to interrogating your body and be like, how do I feel? You just kind of establish a new normal for this kind of like disembodied, kind of like phone land
Yeah.
is how it
Well, and
feels.
it's kind of funny because I think a lot of people get in the sort of trap of like I get this way all the time where like if you're using your phone a bunch and then you stop using your phone and you say I am going to pay attention to how I feel, you're going to feel bad. And it's like so often the response is just to go back to doing it. Like and it's tricky with a lot of things like in fitness especially or in art where you start making movements and you start paying attention to how you feel and you will have negative emotions that come up where you're like, damn, I'm really not competent in this, or damn, I'm really trying or it's just uncomfortable in some
Mm-hmm.
capacity. And like that's kind of the hard thing is like to actually push through that and be like, well, okay, I feel uncomfortable. Can I sit with that for a little bit longer? And like, does that go away? Like often it does, but I think that's what a lot of people struggle with the most. And I've tried to think of more like curriculum elements for that to like be like, yeah, it really does just at a certain point take time to sit through that and be like, it's uncomfortable when you are aware of the state change that you're putting yourself through.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that one I definitely will have to think of more like exercises on that because I think a lot of that just comes with like time more than anything else.
I think so. Um, what do you mean exactly? Like navigating that discomfort?
Yeah, like if I haven't painted in a long time and I'm like I'm gonna approach my easel and I've been scrolling on my phone and I stand there and I look at it and I'm like like I want to go back to scrolling on my phone or doing something else that's like high energy or whatever. To
Mm-hmm.
just sit there there's no like determined time of like, yeah, you wait 5 minutes and it'll go. Like often it is like, yeah, it's only really does take 5 minutes, but it's definitely a practice where the time changes every time that you approach it, just
Mm-hmm.
based on how much you've polluted your space. So kind of a hard thing to like come up with a concrete exercise in that capacity.
Yeah, it is. I've been thinking about like a similar train of thought lately of like I was talking to the guys at the shop about how when you like approach something, we were talking about like just shop organization. And so we were looking at specifically the way that the hammers were laid out in the shop. They're like on a rack, but then there was a bunch of stuff around them. And I was talking about having a good space and saying, well, when you come up to this, you have to navigate all these things of like, okay, there's stuff on the floor, there's stuff here, there's stuff there, and you have to navigate through them to figure out a path to then grab a hammer. But I think I've been thinking about this a lot lately of just as if any of my given like activities in a day or the thing that I'm doing is like me going down like some amount of a maze. And it's really easy to sit in this state of discomfort and be like, take a turn, like phone, like take a turn and go on your phone.
Right.
But a lot of times, all it takes is just to stay in the same path. Like, even if you're just sitting looking at the blank canvas, you still are moving forward with time. Like, the time is still having an effect, and the environment is
Totally.
still having an effect on you as you just sit there. And so I think that's like I think it's a big thing in creating, just be like, well, it's not about always the like output or even doing the thing. A lot of times it's just existing in the space.
Right. Yeah, and it's kind of funny because I think about in the exercise when I was talking about like color and painting. It's like I don't know that I hammered it home enough, but to basically say let's just try to pick a color that like matches your mood or matches whatever you're trying to express. Like
Hmm.
I think a lot of people will inherently draw a blank on that and be like, I don't know. And it's like, well, often eventually you're just gonna have to wait long enough that one will speak to you and one will jump out at you and you'll say like, yeah, I'm feeling green today or I'm feeling red today or whatever. But often that is a function of just time. And I think what I found the main satisfaction of taking the physical element as well in Flex and Paint is that element of like you can build momentum in one and it influences the other, but it acts as this kind of like substitute. So to say, I can stand at my easel and I'm processing in the background, like with that discomfort of like being like, I don't know what's next. I don't know what kind of line to draw or what color to choose. And I can fill that time with physical momentum of being like, I'm going to start moving, start exercising.
Right.
And like that just lets whatever's going on in the background churn while I've still built and retained physical momentum.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point.
Yeah.
Um,
It's weird to think of how you can continue to extrapolate that because I think a lot of times motion for motion's sake is not effective.
hmm.
Like you do need to sit and be patient, but like because they are, in my opinion, like similar but disparate practices, I
Totally.
think they can be
Well,
used effectively.
totally. And I just think in general, there's such value in having some amount of like motion or exertion, also, while at the same time maintaining a really low level of information.
Right.
And I was thinking, I have a note on my wall about that, about the carpentry job that I worked, about how much just interesting mental, like, I would notice just random memories and stuff from like far in my past bubbling up when I was like sanding. When I was sitting there and sanding something for like an hour, to just kind of notice like what happens in what is effectively empty mental space. There's just like a lot of this like emotional response to
Totally.
things. And so I think that in the painting and lifting example, it's you kind of have that where you have some amount of motion, but very low information. You're just
Yeah.
lifting a kettlebell, you know?
Well, and it's kind of like, yeah, you need to put yourself in a space where you are low stimulus. Like your stimulus is entirely owned, like it's owned by you.
Yeah.
So you're like, I am only interrogating myself based on what I've put out there or the lack of what I put out there. I'm not distracting myself with other external things in my environment.
Hmm.
And it's kind of like walking, like going in like a walk in nature where it's like you're kind of just immersed in this sort of subconscious thing. And that's why walking is like so good for processing stuff because you are going to have exactly that effect when you're sanding, where it's like, yeah, you spent a lot of time just being in motion so that your brain can churn.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. I think something we've talked about a little bit, but I think is a really interesting point and just definitely an interesting conceptual jump that I'm trying to make in my book is this just the relation between embodiment and then the relationship between embodiment and the physical space that you're in,
Yeah.
kind of like in this like lumberyard kind of riff, but just generally of just like, I think so much of embodiment is like taking some amount of ownership of your body and the sensations that are going on it. But then I think that naturally leads people into some amount of like I'll say ownership is the wrong word, but like a taking responsibility for the space that they're in, or taking engaging with the physical space that they're in.
Yeah. Kind
And
of
I think that
like like you were talking about having like piles in your space as like an impact to your body or like or an impact to you how you feel. Like what do you mean by that? Like taking responsibility, like cleaning up your space, or like what does that look like for you?
I think a lot of it is just inhabiting it, kind of almost like in an impro level thing. Even like you were talking about of like taking up space, especially going in
Hmm.
public, to just be like, I'm here in this space and I'm inhabiting it generally. Because I think you can get in this disembodied state, you can also just get this very like passing ships kind of effect with people where it's like you're on your phone and you're not really ever like engaging with your physical space, to the extent in like in a city where it's like you don't even engage with your physical space like a couple feet away.
Yeah.
And I think that has like greater, has like a greater carry, like a carry through, I think, to just, it's interesting. People that are creative and do have some amount of embodiment practice are also much more likely to look at their space that they're in with the lens that they're capable of changing it.
Hmm.
Whereas I think a lot of people don't ever have that realization that they like can affect what's right around them.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of like it's like an expression of just kind of this like consumerist mentality where it's like if you spend all of your time on a screen or either buying things or throwing it away, it's like you never actually have traction on what's directly around you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. In the lens that I've been thinking about things, like that's why I think expression as a pillar is important for the program to
Mm-hmm.
say like expression fundamentally is you trying to influence your environment and like have agency around your environment. So like I kind of get what you're saying where it's like this, yeah, like how do you build perceptive capabilities so that people then begin to trust that they can make a positive impact in their space
Yeah.
because it is so integral to how they feel.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hmm. Pretty loose thoughts there.
Very, very vague.
Super vague.
Yeah. Expression is, I feel like that's a tricky one to like pin down. And I was like, okay, we're going to do like some, like fundamentally, you're like, I have an internal state that I'm trying to put out into the world. And then ideally, or like what I think the aims of that are to be acknowledged that people said, yeah, I saw what you did there. And then ideally understood. It's like, okay, like they don't have to always understand it. And that's kind of like where often the disconnect happens. But that's a very good lens to look at it from saying, like, this is you making an impact on your environment, the people around you, but also your space. And like, ideally, I mean, it could be for whatever aim you have, definitely, if you're trying to
Totally.
express
Well, it's
malice or
interesting.
whatever, sure. Like,
It's interesting how many people don't ever make any attempt to be acknowledged or understood.
yeah,
Like, 'cause I mean, I think about that a lot of like, I'm just people in my life that are not creative. It's like you can work a job in an office and then not talk to your neighbors and just like exist in this very ethereal state of like they aren't ever acknowledged or understood. And it's an interesting thing because it seems like once you've then crossed the bridge, it's like embodiment. It's saying, well, like once you've lived in some amount of embodied state, it's like, well, of course, that's just how you live. But
right.
there's a lot of people that don't do that. And I think there's a lot of people that don't make an attempt to be acknowledged or understood in any capacity.
Yeah.
And
And I
it's,
have to wonder if it's like a cultural thing of like stay in your lane, so to speak, of yeah, like you kind of put everything into a box and you're like, I've got my box, and like, why would I venture out of it?
totally, I mean, I think
Yeah.
it's an expression of, I mean, I think about even to go back to the school system, there's
Hmm.
kind of no, you as a student in modern American education, you really never make any attempt to be acknowledged or understood at all. That's not part of the system.
Yeah. I
You're
mean, outside
never,
of, I think there are like some amount of creative writing projects and things, ideally. I don't
there's
know,
a
kind of
little
been
bit, yeah,
a little bit here and there, but it is again very constrained in that it's within this box. It's within this uh like you don't have full agency. You might have partial agency.
yeah. And like you make some amount of an attempt, of course. But I even think about like the things that I did that were like quote unquote expressive of just like band class. It wasn't, there was no real expression of, I was never trying to communicate myself in such a way that was, I was never trying to be understood. It was just like, here's the thing, do
Right.
it right, don't mess up, get a grade.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I think that's yeah, again, the power of like everybody really could have like people who don't think that they're artists. It's like, well, you fundamentally probably have something going on in your head that you want to get out there. So like try and like
Totally.
make an effort to be expressive, even if it's not understood. Like don't, and it's nice to do it in the safety of your own home where you're saying, I'm doing this in the capacity of it's not going to be judged. I'm not even actually trying to let it be understood by anybody other than me. So
Yeah. Well, and I think it's such an interesting thing. I mean, art is so interesting because it's something that I've told new artists that are afraid to say, if you look at anything, look at a tree, look at a plant, everybody's going to look at a different set of details. Like nobody sees all of it in its perfect entirety. And
mhm.
so just to say, what did you see? And then how did you represent it on the page is so much insight into people's like the way their mind works. And I
Yeah.
think it has so much value. And I think it takes a lot of the pressure off of this like objective focus, but it also really brings this kind of thing to say, that people have value just inherently. just in
Right.
your own personhood, there is some amount of value, and just to express that is valuable. I think one of the most important, as we're just like kind of wrapping up this like embodiment thing as like principle, is what's been actually very intriguing to me. It was a book called The Body Keeps the Score, which is about trauma. It's about PTSD and like survivors of sexual assault and these like different kinds of trauma. But something that happens pretty much across the board is that people become disembodied. They become disassociated from their body to such an extent that people with, there's, you know, one of the examples in the book is like a woman is getting like a massage as, you know, an attempt at some sort of therapy. And the massage therapist is like working on her feet. And she says, where are you? Like, where did you go? As she's actively touching her feet. And so it was just like an example of what happens when these systems don't work, is to have no idea even like where your body is in space, and even when somebody's touching it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they talked a lot about too, just people struggling a lot with coordination, like coordinated motion, just like playing volleyball, just like not having the ability to do it at all. And so, but it was important to me in like my conceptual work of tying things together to look at a lot of these trauma survivors to say people lose, what often happens in like classical PTSD is people lose any ability to, they're disembodied, but they lose any kind of like emotional faculties or like ability to engage with their emotions. And then they also often default to like what I've called schematic thinking, where they can be very ordered and they can keep track of things. And like in the book, there's one story of a guy who's a lawyer who's very effective in the courtroom. Like he's a very good lawyer, but he's like, when I go home, I just like, I don't feel anything in like my home life with like my wife and my kids. His emotional capabilities is totally stripped away. But I think it was interesting to me just reading about the extreme end of like this disembodied to realize how tied in your ability to experience the present moment and your emotional faculties and your body are all very tied together and very intimately related, and how those systems are not at all related to your schematic planning, objective thinking systems, to such extent that, you know, all these over here, your embodiment and your emotions cannot work at all, but your schematic systems are totally fine.
Totally.
And that has been a good, like, that's been like a case, not necessarily a case study, but like like a case study of how does PTSD work, to say, to make a modern analysis of saying, okay, well, these systems don't necessarily operate. They can operate independently and they're totally different. And so when you
Right.
look at people that are even just a school system that's so schematic focused and focused on judgments and outcomes and these different things, and at the same time disembodied and removed from the present moment and removed from your emotion, it really in a lesser form replicates what trauma is and what happens when people have like trauma disorders.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting stuff. I have definitely taken it from the lens of like I know a lot less about like severe cases of disembodiment and trauma. And like I've read about it in, again, in The Body Keeps the Score. It's like this thing for, I have no direct experience with it, but I can definitely attest that like there, I think a lot of people have some like level of low grade disembodiment. And that's definitely how I felt for a long time, where it's like, yeah, you do have these symptoms of like lack of being able to connect with your emotions or feel your emotions deeply. And I think that I've noticed, especially in painting, as like one concept of like trying to lead from like, if you have this sort of atrophied sense of embodiment, like I talk about how to be embodied with your tools and to like build fidelity with like using a palette knife or a brush, to start from the lens of embodiment will inherently make you more coordinated, and like you're inherently going to learn how to be more effective with these tools, with coordination, with moving your body, if you are so embodied. And it's like the same thing in fitness, where it's like if you don't have any mind muscle connection, you might just be doing half reps the whole time, where it's like you can actually develop and get better at a skill if you are paying deliberate attention to it. So it's like it's an interesting skill, because I just have to wonder how many people feel that they have some level of not severe atrophy where they're disembodied, but like some mild grade level.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's yeah, I mean, you said something the other day that just was really resonating with me. It's like it's something along the lines of the only reason you haven't what did you say? The only reason that you have
Body body
body
awareness is the reason you have taste.
body awareness is the reason you have taste.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting, but it is interesting to look at like a lot of people don't have any taste. They have not expressed their taste in any way in like their home. Like they haven't put up any art. They haven't made decisions. They haven't made conscious decisions about the stuff in there. They don't make conscious decisions about their food even. They just kind of eat whatever supermarket stuff. And it's like for a lot of people in like a kind of a corporate America train of thought, it's like this whole idea of even taste is gone. It's, what's going to
Right.
be efficient, what's going to be cheap, what's going to be,
Yeah.
XYZ, but it's not making an analysis along the lines of taste or quality.
Yeah. And some of that I think is due to the fact that we have that we have made an attempt to kind of nullify that, where you go work in a very sterile office environment and you say, yeah, there's bright, glaring, cool fluorescent bulbs, and like you're not aware of the response that your body has because you can't be, otherwise you'd be driving yourself insane for
Totally.
forever. So
Well, and
you
then
kind
what
of
you do
just
in those places is a disembodied task. It's like when you on a
right.
computer and you do information work, it's like it's fundamentally disembodied.
Yeah,
And it's, not even necessarily a bad thing. It's kind of just necessary to working on a computer,
totally.
but to not have that safe home that you can return to and say, this is my body and this is how I feel is like is I think the root of a lot of like the reason the modern world is the way that it is, the way that we see it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that that's like a huge context of what you're trying to explore with the book.
Pretty much. I mean, it is. And it's, I'm curious in like tackling a lot of these like things like chronic anxiety and these different things. And a lot of it comes down to we've had so many years of this kind of disembodied, like post-industrial revolution kind of state that then you grow up in that environment. It's like you grow up in the fluorescent lights office kind of space, or like, I mean, that's what school is. Like that's the
Yeah,
schools that I went to. They're kind of like a fluorescent light office space. Don't express yourself. Don't, be judged a lot. And so to make an analysis of like, what does the environment look like as a developmental opportunity? And like, that's been my conclusion is that, yeah, a lot of things are replicating and amplifying this kind of disembodied state. They're encouraging this kind of like projection into the future and this kind of like schematic thinking. And in a lot of ways, I think a lot of the things have been built as an expression of like some amount of trauma, whether it's from, the Great Depression or whatever. It's like we're not very many generations removed from that.
right. Yeah. No, and I think it is important to analyze the environment that we've built and what we could arguably do better so that we are not atrophying that attuned side of your brain and like for the sake of only ever building up schematic thinking.
Totally. I mean, that's like, I think fundamental. And that's like kind of fundamental to my whole work is to say, well, before we even talk about how it ought to be, you just say, well, what is it and what kind of effect does it have?
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of like part of the full spectrum healing is you see so many people coming back into like pursuing a creative practice, pursuing embodiment, pursuing these things, taking some amount of ownership over their space to say, I can actually affect it. And then it's really, those are like steps one and then step two. And then the next step is to actually look around at the society that we live in, not as just this abstract box that you're not able to interact with, but as a canvas to say, well, how can I affect that? How can this be a means of expression for what I want it to be? Because at some point, I mean, that's really what it is, especially as like our generation ages. Is like, well, at some point we drive what society is, and it is not and should not be approached as this thing that is not able to be changed.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. So I think to that point, it is really essential that we analyze the environment and then we build up collectively our attunement to our environment and then our expression so that we say we have agency. We can, in fact, make it better.
Totally. And I think, I mean, just to like, I guess to wrap it up, I mean, I think that's just really why a creative practice is so important is just to even just understand your agency just in a very basic level.
Yeah.
Just as the most basic thing you can do. Well, you can affect a piece of clay that's right in front of you, or you can affect a piece of paper, or you can just have an effect.
Totally.
And
Yeah.
then it's only natural. I mean, it's only natural once you've spent enough years in that kind of space to then that's just a thing you always ask yourself. Well, how can I affect this?
Totally.
And
Well, and I think about back when I was working in tech, it's like this thing where I'm making an impact and I'm affecting this change, but it had no relation to my immediate environment. And that's why a lot of tech work is inherently disembodying, is that you're like, I'm not really sure how I'm feeling about this because I have no real medium to interface with it. And so it kind of degrades your sense of agency in your space.
Yeah,
Or it can, certainly it can.
I could see that. And I think some amount of like feedback, like a lack of feedback.
Yeah.
Because I think something that one of the most interesting quotes that I've stumbled upon the last few years is actually a book about a book about wooden boats. A guy who was a wooden boat builder. He built, these massive sailboats out of wood, but he said something along the lines of like one of the worst things that you can teach your kids is that your work does not matter. But I think that's a big thing for people is that you actually, if you work in this kind of ethereal like computer land, you don't have any sensation or any like, you have no feedback that your work matters. Like it doesn't ever come back to you in
Right.
any meaningful way.
Yeah, definitely. And I think on that note, we should end it here and talk about environment and that feedback loop next time.
Totally.
Cool.